Yes, welcome everybody. And as Sondra talks, you probably know best that we all mute ourselves, so there's no, but feel free to ask questions when the time comes, and Marion will close off for us as usual. Okay, bless you. Oh, Anne Window from Brisbane. Yes.
Oh,
you remember Anne? Yes. We're all looking a bit whiter, I think. These days, aren't we?
But you're in summer down there. You should be lots, suntan.
I'm meaning the hair, Sondra. I'm meaning the hair.
Oh, the hair. Yeah, well, I know about that too.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, So enough of things about white and hair. So first of all, just a few personal words. I was a bit discombobulated this morning. I just got back from the States last night. I went not for a CFOIC business. I went for a personal business.
Yes, yeah.
Because my daughter had her first baby. And so it was just a marvelous time. We ended up, my husband and I both went, and our plan was to wait until our daughter had her baby, and then, leave the next day or something. The flights are not full. It's not hard to do. But then this was a few weeks ago, on a Friday, the news announced that on Sunday, the government of Israel, Sunday, this would have been, I believe, the 19th of December, the government of Israel was meeting to decide and would, let's say for sure, it was, fairly certain that they were going to be deciding to close the skies to Israelis. In other words, already like a week or two earlier, they had decided that they were no longer allowing tourists into Israel because the Omicron variant had increased so dramatically. And at that point, infections were coming almost exclusively from abroad. So with all the reports coming in, particularly from South Africa, but also from Europe, and how infectious this was, so they first, already in the beginning of December, decided to cut the tourists, and the tourists had just begun to be allowed to come in November. So it was really very, very disappointing. But then all throughout this time, Israelis were free to come and go as they chose, certainly since we had the vaccines. And then at that point, the government decided, no, they're going to be not allowing Israelis to go to red countries, and the red countries include the United States and Canada and almost all of Europe. So here we were Friday, it was right a few hours before Shabbat, and we're trying to figure out what we should do. And I called my travel agent and I said, what do you think? He says, well, I think you need to get out of here. Otherwise you're going to take a chance. So my daughter was due that Monday. So we booked and we left Sunday night and arrived on Monday. So basically we arrived on Monday, the 20th, which was her due date. But unfortunately, she didn't give birth till a week later. So we were there, and I had promised my daughter that we would not, be on top of her in any way before the baby, because that's all she needed was her mother sitting and looking at her belly all the time, saying, "When is this going to happen?" So we were a bit vagabonds, there for a week. Thank God, I have to say, we have like almost no family anymore in the States because everyone's moved to Israel. And my sister-in-law and brother-in-law who live in Jerusalem, they happen to be visiting at the same time, and they have one son. And we were going to go stay there. And then that whole family came down with a vile virus, and not corona, but something else. And we said, we're not going near them, because, oh my goodness, that's all we need is to be infected by something. So we were kind of hanging around for a while, and then we went up to New Haven, which is where my daughter lives. And it was interesting. And in the end, she had this gorgeous baby. And so we were there and spent 2 weeks just enjoying the baby. And so I just got back last night. So here I am, totally disconnected, don't realize what day it is. But So let me tell you about first of all, what's going on in Israel.
Well, Mazel Tov, Safta.
Thank you.
Safta now. Yeah.
This is our 10th grandson.
Wow. 10th.
So it is good. I've had a request that people should try to mute themselves when they enter. We will have open mics, soon to have conversation. But for now, this way it enables everyone, to hear me. I don't know if you want to hear me, but if you do want to hear me, I assume if you don't want to hear me, you would join the talk.
Derek and Rodney, I can see you're still not muted, if you don't mind. If you can find your mute buttons. That's great.
Okay, anyway, so I must say that even though I wasn't in the United States this past 2 weeks, I have been in touch with Israel and following the news in Israel daily. And I did get back last night. And of course, one of the first things I did last night was to watch the news because I am just this news fiend. And I have to tell you that for the most part, the main thing that's going on in Israel today is COVID. And I have to tell you that the main thing going on in the United States, which is where I just came from, is COVID. It's all anybody is talking about. 1 second. Okay, I just got my laptop. And so while I'm doing this, I'm also going to try to hook up on my laptop because that's easier. Anyway, so really, this is, and I know that COVID is not a topic I enjoy talking about because it's just so, I don't know what, but it is something that we're all involved in. And I think that, I wrote a letter that I think some of you probably already received. I think I wrote it a few weeks ago. And basically, this letter, I basically said, I wish that we had already hindsight. We already had 2020. They say the hindsight is always 2020. You always have perfect vision when you can look back and you can see what's going in. And this, of course, is the problem because we are right now in the midst of a pandemic and we're having trouble trying to figure out what it is this is all about. I mean, we're very involved in, oh boy, 1 second. Oh, my laptop isn't working either. Okay, forget it. We're gonna just have to continue on my phone. All right. So it's right now, what do we know about? We know about every couple months and sometimes more frequently than that, there's a new variant. Every country has different rules. Every country's rules are changing. There was somebody who was joking, I think the other day here, that said, no, you only should watch the news every third day because then you'll be less confused. Because on the Monday, they say one thing. On the Tuesday, they say something else. On the Wednesday, they say something else. By Thursday, they'll go back to what they said on Monday. So if you only watch the news once in 3 days, you'll be far more consistent in your understanding of what's going on. I have to tell you that I benefited from this, changes, because just to give you a little of some of the insanity, okay, and actually I think in Israel we have a lot less insanity than other places in the world, but okay, just to give you a sense. So my husband and I went together to the United States, but he was feeling a lot more pressure from work. We were both working, on our computers from the United States, but he was feeling much more pressure to get home earlier. The circumcision ceremony was last week on Tuesday, so he decided to leave already on Wednesday. And he left on Wednesday, arrived in Israel on Thursday afternoon. And on Thursday already, they had announced, Thursday morning in Israel, they had already announced that they were changing the rules. It was for a few weeks that if you come back from a so-called red country, when you land in Israel, you have to quarantine for 14 days, but you can get out after 7 days if you take a PCR test on the 7th day, and if indeed it is negative, then you end up with your quarantine only being 7 days. Okay, that was the rules. He lands at 4 o'clock. But before he lands, they already announced they were changing the rules because the Omicron had become so widespread in Israel. There was no longer any sense in discriminating against those people coming in from red countries because Omicron was everywhere. And they went and they changed the rules. If you come in from abroad, okay, you take a PCR test and you're only in quarantine until you get the results of that PCR test or until the conclusion of 24 hours, whichever is sooner. So he took the PCR test. Unfortunately, the results were delayed. He only got the results Saturday night. But he called the Ministry of Health and he says, okay, do I come in under the new rules? Because he was getting a text message from the Ministry of Health saying he has to be in quarantine for 7 days. He said, but you changed the rules. So they said to him, no, but we changed the rules as of midnight on Thursday night. You only came in at 4:30 on Thursday. And he said, but that makes no sense. So the person he spoke to said, you're right. It makes absolutely no sense. But those are the rules. Okay. I landed yesterday. I took a PCR test yesterday at 5:30 in the afternoon. This morning at 6:30 in the morning, I had my results negative. I'm out of quarantine. So I arrived Monday night and I'm free to move around. And my husband is still sitting at home. He arrived last Thursday. So this is absolutely insane. But thank God it's not really harming us because my husband works in computers and he's perfectly capable and able and, to work from home. And in fact, because of all this spread of the illness right now, they're letting all the employees work at home this month as much as they want. So really, it's not such a big deal. But the irony, of course, is the whole thing. But when I do look at all of this, and I know we have differences of opinions here on this meeting, people who like the vaccine and people who hate the vaccine, people who think people think quarantine is a good thing, people think quarantine is a bad thing. And, and I certainly don't want to get into the discussion of all that stuff. But I do want to encourage, shall we say, a positive attitude. Because one of the things, again, I've encountered this much more abroad than I have in Israel. In Israel, there's a bit more of a relaxed attitude about all of this. And there's a little bit more of consensus in Israel about, how things are moving. But I want to step back from all of that and step back from, do you agree with this or that policy? Do you not agree with that policy? And I really want to, shall we say, put out a different sort of perspective. And that perspective is that we're all human beings. We have fallacies, okay? We have limited understanding. As I said, when I opened this discussion, we are not capable yet of really understanding what it is we're dealing with. We will be much wiser in a few years, okay? When the dust settles and we will have perspectives. But today, it is not possible. Oh, Joy, stop nodding your head. Just listen. It is not possible today for us to know whether this particular attitude was the correct attitude or whether it was not the correct attitude. Now, I would like for us to try and give people the benefit of the doubt. And now there's some people corrupt. There's always some people corrupt, okay? But it doesn't do us a whole lot of good to spend our time, shall we say, suspecting everybody and their neighbor with corruption. I think we'd do much better if we go through life assuming that most of the people we encounter on a daily basis are good people, okay? And most of the people that we talk to on a daily basis are well-intentioned. That doesn't mean they're right. They may be wrong, but most people are well-intentioned. And now I'm not talking, there's always going to be crooks and there's always going to be corruption. Those things exist, 100%. But it doesn't do us a whole lot of good as people if every time we talk to somebody, we suspect them of having ulterior motives, of being corrupt, of having taken money under the table, or whatever it is that's going on. And so I just, feel that when we're dealing with this COVID, which is so all-encompassing, it's insane how all-encompassing it is, because there are all these rules that we are all subject to, each in our own country, subject to different rules, whether you like them or not. These are the laws of the land and wherever we live, okay? And therefore, I think that we would do well to, when we talk to our doctors, when we talk to our nurses, when we talk to our hospitals, when we talk to our neighbors, when we listen to people who are making reports, to just give them the benefit of the doubt that they are not doing something evil, that they are making decisions based upon the reality as they see it and as they are judging it to be correct. They may be wrong, and there's nothing wrong with disagreeing with them. But I think for the sake of a better humanity, okay, I think we would be all well to just kind of realize that the doctors who are making recommendations are doing that because this is what they know. And that the reality is indeed changing every single day, and therefore their decisions are changing. And that politicians are trying to balance economic interests and health interests, and the decisions they are called upon to make are not easy decisions. I thank God every day that I don't have to make these decisions. All I have to do is follow the rules. And that's just basically all I wanted to say, just to try to keep the discourse a less suspicious and more accepting and more, embracing kind of discourse. It's good for all of us, I think. For us to be angry, okay, all the time is not a healthy thing. For us to smile all the time is much better. And so I'm just kind of putting forward, my, shall we say, optimistic outlook that Joy always says to me, "Oh, you're always so optimistic." But I am, and it gets me through life, and it makes life a lot easier to live. So that's just, and as I said, this is really what's going on in Israel. There's here and there some political stuff. There's been, for example, some of you may have heard of Arugot Farm, Jeremy. There was an order to uproot the vineyards. That has been delayed for now. There was some conflicts in Chomesh the other night. These, I must say, while some of these things have been troubling, they're kind of at the fringes of the discussion. I wish I could give you an assessment of this government. I wish I could. But because some of these things are so much, you have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it's very difficult to make sense of, is there an overriding policy of this government with regard to Judea and Samaria? Is there an overriding policy of this government with regard to almost anything? It's very hard to identify. Knowing the limitations of this government going into this government, it was clear that it was going to be much more the art of compromise than anything else, because we put together people from disparate places, and we have to at least hope that they get the economy on its feet. But I have to say, I have my own questions about what Bennett is doing. On the other hand, I'm certainly not willing to engage in the name calling and all these other aspersions that are being slung his way by the Likud, for which in most cases did exactly the same thing he did. So anyway, so that's in terms of the politics. There really is not much new to discuss on that issue. I do want to talk a little bit about, we like to take a little perspective from a community. And I want to just kind of tell you a little bit about that. There is a lovely
Could I just throw in, Sondra, on a more serious note? I saw a report, and Stan would have too. You've had about 350 rock throwing incidences in the last 2.5 months, which equated to about, and this is in Judea Samaria, equated to about 8 a day, and 50 firebombs, which all sound very serious, I thought.
Well, I'll tell you what, first of all, there has always been rock throwing going on in Judea and Samaria. We are indeed seeing an increase in the last couple months, no question. But I have to say that is, I always see that as separate from politics. because the issue of rock throwing is something, or whatever it is, attacks, and sometimes it's worse than rock throwing. And we've had some more severe attacks in these past few months. We've had some fatalities in these past few months. The whole issue in Chumash began when this young boy, Yehuda Dimantman, was murdered outside of Chumash. And I would say there is complete consensus in Israel that these issues need to be handled by the IDF. That it doesn't matter who's in the government. Okay, the requirement to protect the people of Judea and Samaria from rock throwing, from terrorists, from whatever. This is the responsibility of the IDF, and the IDF is well aware of this increase, has been talking about this increase, and is indeed upping its activities, mostly in the intelligence area, because that's where they get the most accomplished. It's very difficult. We have, many kilometers of roads and side roads and paths and all kinds of places where somebody can jump out of and throw a rock. And especially when so many of these people are acting on their own. They're not organized. It's not like some organization, Hamas, says, okay, guys, here you're 10 people. Each of you are assigned to this street corner, and that's where you're going to throw a rock. There's a general atmosphere encouraging that, certainly in Hamas and in other sectors as well. But someone wakes up in the morning and decides to take a rock, and he goes to some place and he throws a rock. So it is not possible for the IDF to be everywhere all the time. But that is why intelligence is so important, because very often they're able to know of a particular event about to happen because they have their assets in the villages and wherever. I can tell you, for example, my son right now is on active reserve duty. He was called up a week and a half ago, I think. Scheduled, okay? But he is actually doing his reserve duty now in the Gush Etzion Junction. And it's scary, for me. I don't think he's so scared, but, for me, I know that is a place that has always been a target for activity. I asked him the other day, I said, well, are you wearing ceramic vests, bulletproof vests? And he said, yes, when they are at the Gush Etzion Junction. And then he told me the other day that they went in the middle of the night and they arrested 3 terrorists in a neighboring village. So these are things that are going on every single day. Every night there are arrests. Every single day there's patrols. There's acting on information. So this is something that we're dealing with all the time. And I don't believe that this is something that, some government policy is going to change this way or that way,
On that, Sondra, I think some of us are wondering, though, does the enemy feel emboldened by all the compromises that current government policy, is giving towards the Arabs, the electricity to illegal dwellings and approve? And I don't know, Stan, if you had something to throw in here as well, if that was okay.
It's fine with me.
Oh, I just thought that I'd kind of wait for Sondra to present, and then if there's a time for discussion afterwards, I might have a question or two, so I don't interrupt the flow.
Okay, no, definitely we'll have time. If you like,
that's all good.
Well, okay, I would like to respond to this whole thing of the electricity law. First of all, you have to, I really believe you have to divide between Arabs who are citizens of Israel and the Arabs in Judea and Samaria who are not citizens of Israel. The Arabs in the Negev, the Bedouin, who are the subjects of that electricity law, I personally support the idea of improving the lives of the Bedouin there. I think it's something that the state of Israel has failed to do for many, many years. However, there's a big difference between trying to improve the lives of the people living there, making sure they have all the formal structures, and hooking up illegal homes to electricity. Now, the problem of the Bedouins in the south, in the Negev, has been that for years, okay, the Bedouins have just gone wherever they feel like going. they like a piece of land over there somewhere. They want to graze their sheep wherever. So they set up a little encampment, and suddenly overnight, it's a town, and it's an illegal town. And for years, the government of Israel said, you're illegal, and there's plenty of places over here for you Bedouins to live. You, like everybody else in this country, need to come into the legal places. You will have ability to have land, to have a house, to have whatever you want, but you have to do it where it's legal. You can't do it wherever you choose to do it. And this has been an ongoing struggle. And there are a number of times when there were actual agreements made between the leadership of the Bedouins and the state of Israel. This is going back 20 years already, where they would agree to leave the illegal places and move into more established places. And over the years, those agreements provided many different details. And although sometimes they went so far as to say, okay, we understand, Bedouin, you don't want to live in a city. It's not your way of life. Set up your same kind of rural kind of living space, but over here, where it's organized is where the land is fit for this, and not over here where the land is supposed to remain either a nature preserve or maybe it's even military installation or whatever. And over the years, some of these things have happened. There have been new communities, Bedouin communities established. Some people have moved into it, but as a whole, it's been a failure. Okay, and now what's happening is that we have the party, Ra'am, this Arab party in the government, that one of the things that they've insisted on is to connect these people living in the illegal places to electricity. Now, some of the people are living in places that they believe will be organized, will become legalized, okay? And so it makes sense to hook them up to the electricity. Others are in places where they've already received orders from the court that these houses have to be taken down, and they're in the process of being evicted or taken down. To hook those places up to electricity doesn't make any sense. So that's one of these places where there was a suggestion made to distinguish between those places that may be on their way to legalization. Okay, you want to hook them up to electricity as a humanitarian gesture, okay. But blanket to hook everyone up to electricity makes no sense. I do not understand how our government didn't enable that change to go through. And the other thing that was brought up, and this was brought up by the Likud, which of course I supported very much, was if you're already going to make an exception for humanitarian reasons to hook up at least some of the Bedouin villages to electricity, there's no excuse for not allowing the so-called illegal outposts in Judea and Samaria also to be hooked up to electricity, especially when we're talking about all those outposts that are on the list, okay, that the government of Israel has prepared to legalize them. And that fell as well. I want to wait and see what actually happens, because there's no question, as we're talking about in the Knesset, the Arab Party, Ra'am, has this government sometimes by the throat. And sometimes they are agreeing to what they want in order to prevent another set of elections, which nobody wants. I would want to see that these people from the Likud would join with people from Yamina and other people and make some kind of ad hoc coalition on some of these issues. I would like to see that instead of the Likud calling names to all these other people, have a real effort to try to put together an alternative coalition. Unfortunately, none of that is happening because the opposition is more intent on being an active and aggressive opposition than they are in looking to find places to compromise and cooperate. I have a lot of faith in Ayelet Shaked. She's the Minister of Interior. She has a lot of power, and her attitude has been very much under the radar. See how much she can actually get done. Delay things here, promote things there. At the end of the day, though, when it comes to Judea and Samaria, I feel very strongly that those communities, the communities that were on this list already for a few years, that Netanyahu created that list and made a promise that he would legalize all of those communities, at which point they would all be connected to electricity. Now, by the way, I want to be very clear. Every single one of these communities has electricity. They're not without electricity, but it's electricity that is because it's hooked up to a neighboring community, which means the volume of your electricity is limited, and it's also very often expensive. Okay, some places are supplemented by a generator. The arrangements are made. They're not without electricity. They're not living in the dark ages, okay? But there's a lot of problems in what's going on in these communities in Judea and Samaria. These are communities that everybody recognized will become normal communities. And this does not include Chomish, by the way. Chomish is a community that was taken down by the disengagement. Whether we liked it or not, it was a community that was erased and destroyed at that point. The people who have gone up to live there have been doing so in flagrant violation of the law all of this time. Now, the fact that they've gotten away with it is one thing, but it's been a very primitive kind of arrangement over there. Okay, very different from a community like Rechelim, a community like Nofei Nehemiah, a community like Avigail. Okay, these are communities that are functioning and looking like any other community today, that the government has de facto recognized them, providing them with services, except they're considered illegal, and therefore they still don't have proper hookups to electricity as well as other things. This is the kind of thing that has to stop, and that the government has to move forward and legalize these communities. And it was very distressing to me to see that that has not happened yet. Anyway, I am perfect. I wanted to, you know what, why don't we just give us a break here and engage some questions, and then maybe I'll conclude with a little bit of a perspective from one of the communities that I've chosen to talk about today.
Go for it, Stan.
Hi, everyone. I'm not, Sondra, as you may know, I'm in the diaspora. I'm in captivity, in exile in Europe, in the forest.
No, I didn't know. Okay.
Yes, I've been here for a while, waiting for those doors to open up and tourism to resume properly. I guess I would wondering, in your communities, which this is a bit of a generalized statement, but I think it's true to recent history. The Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria are probably the most vilified of all facets of Israeli society. You stand pretty much, even though pre-election surveys indicate that a majority of Israelis are more on the right side of the political spectrum. Overall, I still think what happens in the communities is often it's usually vilified by the media, but it's often happening sort of almost off the radar of a lot of the Israelis who live on the coastal plain, let's say, where the majority of your people live. I understand from those of you I know who live there that you're battling. That's why you exist with Christian Friends of Israeli Communities. You're battling for support. You're waging public relations campaigns, information campaigns. You're trying to get people to come and visit. And as a tour guide who guides exclusively Christian groups, probably only something like 5% of the groups I guide will cross the green line and come into Judea and Samaria. Most don't, even for various reasons. Most tours are not even including your communities on their itineraries. That's the kind of isolation that you're constantly living in and experiencing. I wonder how the closure of your borders and the reticence of many multitudes of Christians who would normally come to Israel, and hopefully a fair percentage of them would visit your homes. I wonder how you're feeling about the gates being slammed shut in the first instance and what you've gone through the last 2 years, but perhaps more pertinent to right now, the fact that even though the gates are open, you're going to get relatively few evangelical Christian supporters of Israel coming into the country, any part of the country, but even more so to your communities because of the stipulations concerning the vaccinations that are needed to get into the country. Without getting into contentiousness at all, I'm just wondering how you're feeling about the the dearth of visits. Everything is basically down to Zoom meetings now, and now and then a handful of people who happen to get into the land come and visit people like Jeremy Gimpel and others. But mostly you're kind of even more on your own than ever. Is that something that sits on you, that weighs on you?
Okay, so it's kind of, I would say as follows. First of all, the lack of visitors is really, it's national. It's not just Judea and Samaria. So if anything, the experience of the last 2 years has brought us all much closer together, because whereas beforehand when tourists would come in, I would be dealing with this on a daily basis, because we were very busy with tourists, thank God, and we would have, I would say, an average of 1 or 2 tour groups coming our way a week, certainly during the tourist seasons. But I was dealing on a regular basis with finding, discovering tour groups, or someone contacting me from a tour group and saying, "Oh, we'd love to come," and I would try to work with them to talk to their tour leader or to their tour operator, and still getting the door slammed on our face. "Oh no, we're not going to come to you. We don't cross the green line." So we have not had to deal with any kind of discrimination now for 2 years, because we're all in the same boat. There's no difference between Judea and Samaria and the rest of the country with regard to COVID. Everything having to do with COVID is the same. So none of us are getting visitors from abroad. None of us are, able to, what we are able to do or not able to do, it's all the same. There's absolutely no difference. So in a way, that's kind of calm things. It makes you, you don't have the kind of divisions that we had before, at least on that sense. In terms of tourism, I'm well aware that we have a serious problem in that many, not all, but many evangelical Christians are not willing to get vaccinated. And these are the same people who are the bread and butter of the Israeli incoming tourism. And that is very distressing to me. However, I have to say that there is quite an overwhelming consensus in Israel, including in Judea and Samaria, in favor of that policy. We are very supportive of vaccines. We have all gotten vaccinated. I don't know. I'm telling you, I'm dealing with with Jews all the time in Judea and Samaria. I go to the communities, they come here, and everybody I have met has been vaccinated. Every single one. It is maybe 1 or 2 people that I heard about that were not vaccinated, but just about everybody that you deal with on a daily basis from all the communities are vaccinated. And so people are feeling that they don't want exposure, certainly not at this point when things are still so volatile. We don't want exposure to people who have not been vaccinated. And we would just hope and pray that people would, even if they don't like the vaccine, they would just get the vaccine if they really want to come to Israel. But the truth of the matter is, there's really not that much of a difference. In other words, most countries today around the world are taking that policy in one way or another. It's very hard to get on an airplane today and travel abroad if you're not vaccinated. I know people in the United States. I've met evangelical Christians who are not keen on the vaccine, but got vaccinated because they love to travel, not only to Israel, they want to go wherever they want to go. And they realize that in order to travel, they need to have the vaccine. So this is an issue that's really covering a lot of different people, but it's certainly not making us feel more isolated than before. And I would say that Zoom has been amazing, and not just Zoom, but all kinds of the use of the media, our social media, whatever, private media, I would say, to connect and to get our messages across. So, we always had email and phone. And so we continue to be in touch with people. But through these Zoom meetings, and this is something that we've had very successfully now for quite some time, and it's something that I think is not going to leave us, because even once tourism resumes, and it will resume, and there will come a time where you'll be able to come to Israel, even if you don't have a vaccine. This will pass. Okay, see, Joy, I'm optimistic on this too. This will pass. And there will come a time when you're just going to have to make sure your passport's in order. And if you need a visa, you have your visa and whatever it is you need. And then you're going to come to Israel like you used to. Okay, that will happen. But Zoom is never going to leave us. And I think that's really wonderful, because I'm sitting here today talking to you. Some of you are in Europe. Most of you are in Australia. And it is if we're in the same room. Now, even if you were to come to Israel, okay, most of you, Joy would come for months at a time. Marianne would come for months at a time. That was great. Most of you come, some of you come once in a lifetime. Some of you come once in 3 years, right? But I can see you every month in Zoom. And that's what's really amazing. So I do think that if you're talking about a feel of isolation, we have not got an increased feel of isolation. In any case, we're less isolated and in a way more connected with our Christian supporters because we're able to see them on Zoom so much more often and in such pleasant environments than we did before. Now, all that to say, believe me, I don't want Zoom to ever come to replace tourism. Tourism is very important, and I hope and pray, Stan, that there will come a time where you will have a tour group every 2 weeks. You finish a tour group, and maybe you have a day to rest up, and then you move on to the next one. And I'm hoping that will happen to all the wonderful tour guides in Israel, who right now are sitting at home. And this is the one industry in Israel that has been irreparably damaged, the incoming tourism. Terrible. I mean, the hotels are fine. Some of the hotels in Jerusalem are not doing so well. The hotels in Eilat are doing fabulously because all the Israelis that used to go abroad all the time are going to Eilat instead. So economically, we're seeing things within the country, it is doing okay. Yes, there are people who have suffered, no question, and with the openings, closures, and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I have to tell you, and Stan, you will remember this, I'm sure, during the second Intifada, between 2000 and 2004, when there were no tourists in Israel, there were handfuls of evangelical Christians who braved the fear and came in.
We were there.
You were there. But you will remember, Joy. You will remember, Joy, walking down Jaffa Street in Jerusalem and seeing store after store closing down. And go because they didn't have any customers. Stores that relied on tourists to come in and buy gifts and buy books and whatever. And you would go, and so many people would tell me, you told me, and Marion, I know, told me, going into shops and shopkeepers literally hugging them and welcoming them with tears in their eyes because they were the first customer they had all week. And so we have weathered bad times before of different sorts, but we will get through this. We will all get through this, okay? And I just have to say that we have to continue feeling connected to one another, doing what we do in whatever mediums are open to us. I can't travel to Australia. I am traveling to the States. I've gone twice already for CFOIC. I am now planning at least 3 more visits in this year. I have a visit plan for May, a visit plan for July, and I may add a visit in March. Okay, so I'm traveling to the States, and there are places that are welcoming me. There are places that are not. There are churches that are still not meeting. There are individuals, even evangelical Christians, who are not going out, who are not hosting people, who don't want to meet me. And it makes sense. I don't care. Everybody has to make their own decisions, what they feel comfortable with. So it's difficult for everybody. But we will get over this, and we will continue to be in touch, and it will be okay. I truly believe. Are there other questions before I go and talk about our little community? Yes, Judy, that's a very nice comment. Is there anybody else with a question? Barry has a question.
Barry. Unmute, Barry.
Just trying to reach. Tourism, and obviously I feel very much the tourist operators over there. To what extent has the lack of tourism affected the economy of Israel? What percentage of the Israel economy depends on tourism? And what would your guess be on when it will return to normal?
Okay, so tourism, I was actually surprised to discover tourism does not make up as large a percentage of the economy as it used to. So it's really quite a small percentage relatively. But again, part of that economy is being substituted by what we call, internal tourism. So Israelis going for weekends to hotels in Israel, going to Eilat in Israel, going to the Dead Sea. There are some of the tour guides, there's not as much as they used to be, but here and there are tour guides that are taking Israelis, on tours in the country. So I would say the effect on the overall economy is minimal, Unfortunately, the people who are affected terribly. In other words, the actual tour guides, the tour companies, the tour bus companies, these are the people who are directly affected, and there's no question that the effects on them have been devastating. They have received compensation to some extent from the government, but now there's a big question is what happens next, because that compensation just went up until the fall, and now people are, there was a return of tourism in November, and now they've just announced that tourism can return. So there are tour groups coming in. There really are. There are tour groups that came in November, and there are tour groups that are planning to come in starting, in February, because they just announced this week that it's open. But they have to be vaccinated. But the majority of tour groups coming into Israel are vaccinated. They don't have a problem with this. Don't forget, there's a lot of tour groups that come into Israel that are all kinds of people, not necessarily. First of all, there are evangelical Christians who are getting vaccinated. I'm in touch with a pastor, just sent me a message yesterday. He says he has a tour group coming from the United States, and he plans on still coming in February. He knows that they have to be vaccinated, so he is vaccinated, and he is confident that his group is coming. So I'm assuming, even though I know there are people in his church that were not in favor of the vaccines, I'm assuming there are a certain number of people that want to come to Israel badly enough they're getting vaccinated. I never enter into those discussions. I just want to know, are you coming? What date can I meet you, and where are we going? So I have a day scheduled with this guy in February. Now, this is a guy, a pastor, who has rescheduled his trip 3 times already, and every time he had to cancel. And so I'm hoping that indeed he will come, but according to the government announcement, he will. So for people who are vaccinated, they can come. And when you come into the country, it's open. It's fairly open. And if you have a vaccine, you can do anything. If you're exposed to COVID, that's a whole different ballgame. If you've been exposed, and even that they're changing. If you've been exposed, now you have to be tested, and you're in quarantine for maybe just a day or 2, and that's it. They're really loosening up on that because they don't want to cripple the economy.
The problem is in our part of the world, even if you are vaccinated, the uncertainty of whether you can get back and facing quarantine, etc., and so on, people just don't want to go to the trouble.
Well, that's true. Well, don't forget, Australia is the strictest country in the world, I believe. So your problem coming from Australia is much more an Australian problem than an Israeli problem.
Yeah.
Coming in and out of Australia is very difficult. But in Israel, the shops are open, the restaurants are open, all the tourist sites are open. You can go. Again, there is a problem. If somebody in your tour group gets sick, gets COVID, and you've all been in this bus together, in very cramped quarters with someone who just got sick, that's going to be a problem, And I have a feeling that there are people who are not, whether or not they're vaccinated, are not necessarily willing to take that kind of trip right now, just because they don't want to risk being in a bus with 30 or 40 people in close quarters for 10 days when you have no idea what you'll be exposed to. And that's something that we're dealing with. There's no government rule can change that sense. But hopefully things are going to start opening up gradually. We can just hope. We want to get rid of this. That's the issue. We want it all to go away. Okay, is there any other questions?
Yeah, Sondra, the United Nations is getting pretty aggressive towards the settlers, aren't they? Different bodies and so on.
No, here?
No. Yeah.
No. See, and that's another thing that I have to caution you.
Yeah.
When you see, for example, last night, the soldiers were removing people at Homesh. That's a very disturbing thing, okay? It disturbs us all, but it is no way representative. Homesh is a completely illegal place. It was by law, it was a town that was taken down during the disengagement in 2005. All right. So that's a long time ago. And you can agree with that or disagree with that, but you can't disagree with the fact that it is as illegal as it comes. Okay. You can say,
yeah. I wasn't meaning.
What's very important is not to think that that is a situation all over Judea and Samaria. That's a very specific place. There are, almost 500,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria.
Yeah.
99% of them are living in completely legal homes with absolutely no danger of being uprooted anytime soon, with no conflict between them and the government or between them and the IDF. Now, we very often have their policies. We would prefer, for example, to be annexed. We would like to be part of Israel like everyone else. These are issues that are clearly of problematic issues to us that we are constantly lobbying. And like Stan was saying, how important it is, the public relations campaigns that we post. We have huge issues around the world. The United Nations, the boycotts, all that stuff outside of Israel, huge issues. In Israel, there are much fewer issues. Okay.
Yeah. I was really thinking of the United Nations and outside Israel. The attitudes kind of looking in,
right,
and the United Nations bodies and so on.
So the first prime minister of Israel, his name was David Ben Gurion. Okay, and even then, the United Nations was making trouble for Israel, though not nearly as bad as it is today. Now, the UN, the abbreviation UN in Hebrew is It's kind of like saying Okay, we say That's how it's referred to in Israel, the And years ago, Ben Gurion said, shmoom. Basically his way of saying, who cares? Let them pass their votes. Let them do what they want. Who cares? And that's basically our opinion. I'm assuming that the foreign minister of Israel and Israel's ambassador to the UN has to take these things a lot more seriously. But most of us basically say, you know what? Let them rot. Let them sit. Let them do whatever they're doing. We're just doing what we're doing. And that, by the way, is the reason why an organization like CFOIC is so important. Because if we were to read the newspapers or whatever we're reading or seeing these days, and seeing the UN and all these, or foreign ministers or whoever it is, everybody getting up and making all their statements about Israel, and we were to believe that indeed that was representative of the whole world, it might be very depressing for us. Oh my gosh, nobody loves us. But that is why when CFOIC is able to reach out to the grassroots of ordinary people in all of those same countries where their prime ministers are saying bad things against Israel, but then we can come and say, no, wait a second. That does not represent all the people in that country. Look, we have millions of Christians, just as one example. We have millions of Christians who stand with Judea and Samaria. And CFOIC is just one vehicle of many to, we're the only vehicle that is specific Christians and Judea and Samaria, but we're just one of many vehicles where Christians are able to express themselves on this issue. And it is very important because we have brought this message to the people in Judea and Samaria and to all over Israel. And people now know in Judea and Samaria, the UN can say what it wants, but CFOIC is representing all these other people who say differently. And that's amazing empowerment.
Amen.
That's good.
Amen. It's really brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have to say, Sondra, how much I admire your faith and tenacity and courage there in Israel.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you. That's very kind. Anyway, before it's getting late and we've really gone over, so let me just say a few words about this very special community that I wanted to talk about. We put out some emails about it. It's a community called Givat Hanan. It is actually part of Susia. Susia is a very established, although fairly small, community in the southern Hebron Hills. For those of you who have been there or have not been there, it's in between Hebron and Beersheba, if you can picture where that would be. And there's a number of communities there along a road. And then we had it's like on the way to the Negev. So it's kind of, as you drive from Hebron southwest, you're becoming more and more desert kind of landscape. So it's kind of brownish dirt, with some trees here and there. That's more or less what you see. So Susia actually was established right next to the ruins of an ancient town by the same name, a town that was in existence probably between the 4th and 12th centuries, although most of its activity was already winding down by the 9th century. Archaeologists have found a whole network of caves and dwellings and a synagogue that's just amazing. So I certainly encourage you to visit there. So the modern community by the same name was set up just next to that. It is sort of like a continuation from ancient to modern, ancient Jews to modern Jews today settling in the same place. Now, just across the road from Susia is this hilltop that is state land. It's not owned by Arabs. Has not been settled by anybody. But it was seen as a very important strategic point to protect the entire area. And a group of families got together and decided they were going to settle there. Now, this is one of the places that it's considered a so-called illegal outpost, or what they now refer to these days as the young pioneering communities. And they went up there and they settled, and they called the community Givat Hanan, which means the Hanan hilltop, and it's named for a man, Hanan Porat, who was one of the most important settlement leaders. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago from cancer. Very, very sad. I didn't know him personally, but I studied in his classes many times. He was a brilliant man with the biggest heart that you can imagine. He actually grew up in Kfar Etzion. He was in Kfar Etzion before 1948. Okay, he was a small child when at the end of 1947, they evacuated the mothers and children from Kfar Etzion. This was one of the few communities in Judea that existed before Israel became a state. Unfortunately, the community fell in 1948. It fell the night before Israel became a state. It fell on May 4th, 1948. And the women and children had been evacuated. So he was one of those children who had been evacuated. His father was killed in that battle. And 19 years later, he was a young man. He was in the army. He was a paratrooper and one of the men that helped liberate the old city of Jerusalem during the 6-Day War, after which he led a group of people that had all been children evacuated from Kfar Etzion, and he led a group of them to come back and resettle Kfar Etzion, and the Prime Minister of Israel gave them permission to settle right after the 6-Day War, and it was actually the first community to be settled after the 6-Day War. And as I said, then he became a major leader of the settlement movement. He was also in the Knesset. He was a very, very great man, and it was after this man that this community has been named. It's called Givat Hanan. There are just a few families there, 10 families living in small caravans. And we were there. I was there with someone from my office. We were there together a few months ago. And on the one hand, it's very close to Susia. It's just you go down the hill. You cross the main road, which is not so easy to cross on foot because it's quite a busy road. But whatever. And then you enter the road to Susia. So it's really not far. But on the other hand, they have quite an isolated kind of existence. And very few services. They don't even have, it took a while till they had the road paved. They don't even have garbage services. They have to take their garbage down the hill to Susia. And one of the things that we were raising funds for them was for an indoor play area, because in the wintertime, they are on this hilltop where the winds are very severe and it gets quite cold in the winter, at night especially, but also during the day. And so we have raised funds. In fact, I just came back now from the States, having raised the funds from somebody to put up that indoor play center so the children can play in a warm area. But one of the things that I just love about this community, there's a family, one of the first families who moved there. They had actually built a home in Susia, and they have a few children, young family. And they had just finished building their new home, which they, of course, had planned and worked and saved money for, a gorgeous new home in Susia. And they had just moved in. They had just unpacked their boxes. And the leaders of this new settlement group, Givat Hanan, came to them and said, we need more people. Will you join us? And they got up and left their brand new house and moved into a caravan, which is what they've been living in now for the last 2 years, which is amazing. I mean, the kind of people that would do that just because they knew this is a piece of land that needs to be held on to. And we hope and pray that this too, like so many of the other similar communities like this, will become official, will become legalized, and will be able to enjoy all the benefits and services of the state of Israel, proper electricity hookup, which they don't have, and all the other things, the ability to build permanent homes. We're hoping all of that will happen very soon. But I wanted to just share with you a little bit about this little community, a place that I've been recently, and that is really very special to my heart.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. Well, I might just hand over to Marion now because we are well over 8 o'clock. But that's been great, Sondra. Marion, you go.
What time is it there, Sondra?
Pardon?
What time is it there in Israel? What time?
It's just afternoon. It's 12:12 p.m.
Okay. So it's after 9 p.m. here in Melbourne. That's great. As always, great information, of beyond blessing to have somebody on the ground there, but not only just on the ground, somebody who is so involved with keeping us and wanting to keep us informed. I would say a lot of people on the screen probably agree with me. We're not so optimistic about the news we get that you seem to have, but that's okay. We're all people of prayer. And just very quickly, Sondra, it's a little bit off the grid. What I'm going to ask you that, I trust that everyone in the Zoom are God intended, God focused, God engaging. People who have lives that don't exist apart from God, however that is walked out, however that is believed, and it's because of that we are connected to Israel, and thankfully you. And for my own Melbourne city and the people that I fellowship in God with, we are definitely not all agreeing on everything, but nonetheless, we're looking to him to give us more understanding of the days we're in, because I think you agree in all the different streams of Judaism that God is not silent in these days, that he speaks all the time and is very involved with what's going on in the earth. He is not separated out from it. So
Amen.
My question just quickly is in one quick sentence, because I think I'm now on a time limit. My boss has said, okay, we'll wrap up now. But anyway, I think it's for me, I'd love to know from your perspective, how are those, and we understand too that, just to be Jewish doesn't always put you in an intensely relational, life with God and Torah and Bible. It's all from one end of the scale to the other. And certainly we live amongst the people who don't, atheists down here, agnostic, some people who just deny God's existence. So in Israel, there are those elements as well. What I'm asking basically is, how are they feeling as far as your community, perhaps the ones that you go to synagogue with? Are they feeling that this is something that God is actually allowing to happen, and just really feeling at rest that he is doing something good when it doesn't look good? I guess, through the Tanakh, we see that he was always present. There was no no disconnect from God. He had a say in everything, and yet he would let people roll off the bridge if they wanted to. So how is the consensus there? Do you feel people are really crying out to God for this COVID time, that they would, feel that he has a very big purpose for this?
Well, this is basically what I meant when I said at the beginning that we don't really understand today, and that one day we will have a better understanding. I wasn't just referring to medicine. I was referring also to the spiritual side of it. Basically, what it is that God is trying to tell us right now, I have no clue, and I don't know anybody that does. We live in a different kind of time than the Bible, and I think if there was one event in history that said that to us, that was the Holocaust. The Holocaust was a horrible event, and I don't think anybody in their right mind would say that was a punishment for Jews. It was too broad. It encompassed 6 million Jews, babies and innocents and all kinds of people. So if during biblical times things were a little bit clearer. Actually, I just heard a teaching a few days ago on Zoom, by the way, from a rabbi that I have studied with for many years. And he was saying that basically after the temple was destroyed, and there was, and even afterwards, there was a period of time where there was a certain level of God's presence amongst us in Jerusalem, shall we say. And that is no longer with us. So we're in a different situation. We don't have the kind of situation where God immediately responds for good or for bad. He more or less lets things happen. But that doesn't mean he's not in charge. That doesn't mean he's not there looking over. And so it's very hard for us. It's much harder for us to read events and say, this is what God has in mind, than it was for the prophets and the kings of biblical times. God gives us a much murkier picture. And there are times when we feel God's very direct presence, and we see miracles and we say, oh, that is God directly, whispering in our ear and tapping us on our shoulder. But with this thing, I don't think we're seeing that at all. I do believe, though, that God, none of this is being done without God's desire. Nothing in the world happens without God's desire. And I do believe that God expects us as human beings to do what we can to deal with these issues. I don't think, we don't believe as Jews that you're not supposed to go to a doctor, and just pray. We believe that God wants us to go to a doctor because he has given doctors the wisdom to do what they can, but you're supposed to pray at the same time that whatever the doctor's doing or whatever else you're doing will be effective. And so, that's just basically, a general approach. But do I have a message or understanding right now? No, but definitely we are praying for clarity. We are praying for healing. I think at the end of the day, that is what all of us must be doing, praying for healing at the end of the day, praying that this terrible pandemic goes away, pray that people come back to one another. These are things we need to be praying for.
Yeah.
When God isn't speaking, it's time to seek his face.
100%.
I think our prayer also is for many people who have strayed off, like the prodigal, we call it, will return in these difficult days and begin to commune with him again and have faith in him. We thank you very much, Sondra, for again taking the time to be our Israeli sister. And just again delighted to hear that I didn't even know your daughter was married, let alone having a baby. So that was a double whammy for me. And it's just great.
Well, they just got married. It was Corona. Yeah. They weren't coming back. They were in the States, and they just got married. Yeah. No pomp and ceremony.
Oh, well, sometimes I think that's the sane and sensible thing to do. I am aware of a young Jewish woman who did IDF from Australia, and she wants to stay, and she met another man in Israel. So, you know how difficult that is for non-citizens to get married there. So they often went to Europe. He comes from Ukraine, and the kerfuffle over that was they ended up at a registry office, but now she's home in Australia, and now they're going to have the big shebang, you know, and I'm thinking, get over it. Just, you're married now, you know. But anyway, her father is a minister, so she wants him to do the blessing. So anyway, again, thank you, and we will look forward again to catch up, because yes, this is very be awake and alert days. Don't go to sleep on and get complacent about what's happening. So yeah, lots of love.
Okay.
Thanks for everyone coming.
Thank you,
Bye.
Sondra. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Stan. Bye.
Great to see
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.